Hello and welcome back to Web Design for Small Business. In this video, Part 5, Tools of the Trade, we're going to be going over some of the programs that you can use to create your website with that make life a little bit easier. So to start, we're going to go back to where we left off in the last video, and you should have this as your index.php file. If not, quickly catch up, and you should already be here. If you didn't, it means you skipped the last video and you might want to go back and watch that. For now, we're going to go back to our main control panel. Okay, in this window, first I'm going to hit refresh just to make sure it hasn't kicked me out. Okay, perfect, we're still in there. Under Files, you will see something called FTP Accounts, and I want you to click on that link. Okay, so now you're going to get this, and it's going to say add FTP account. So the login, we're going to create a username, and it should be something that has something to do with your website, but not super easy for people to understand. So I will go with Highway 45 admin. Okay, and the domain, highway45.ca, since that is my website, that should be yours. And then the password, now this can be the same as the password that you created for your actual web host to get in, or for your email. I do recommend it be slightly different, but again, if it's just a matter of having something you can remember, then putting the same one is fine as well. Just make sure it's something that's easy for you to remember, but passes all those requirements. So there should be some lowercase letters, uppercase letters, numbers, and special characters, and it should be at least 8 characters in length. Okay, so now the directory, we want this to be our web root. Okay, and that's going to be fairly important. So if you don't remember what that is, go back and just look at what you named the folder. In this case, it's Highway 45. If it's the only one you have, it might actually be public_HTML. And if you typed it incorrectly, it should actually pop up a list of actual folders that have that same name. So if you type it in and you don't actually see anything pop up underneath for you to click on, it means that that's not right. So for example, if I were to do public_HTML, you can see that's in that list there as well. But for this case, we are using Highway 45. Okay, and the quota we want to be unlimited. And create FTP account. Perfect. Account created. Okay, so now that we have that created, we can go back to the main cPanel. That was all we needed to do within our web host, within cPanel. So now we can go onto the internets and look up a specific file called FileZilla. Now, what FileZilla is it is a free FTP client. It's one of the more popular ones, and it is available on pretty much any operating system, aside from Android. So it works on Windows, it works on Mac, it works on Linux. If you are using some other operating system like a Chromebook, you may have to find different software, but with Chromebook there are a lot of options because it uses Android. Basically just look up FTP client and you should find something that is free. For our purposes, we're going to be using this, and just download the appropriate one for you. If you're using 64-bit Windows, if you're not sure if it's 64-bit or 32-bit, if it's a computer that is probably 15 years or younger, it is most likely using 64-bit operating system. So you can download, and we only need the basic. If you want the comprehensive PDF manual, I suppose you can download that one, but basically all we need is the standard one. So you download that. If it asks you if you want to keep or discard, obviously you keep it. That's just the little, we don't know if this is a virus thing, which is super annoying, but I guess nice, I don't know. Hit run. Popped up on my other window, sorry. I agree. Loading data. For anyone. Sure, we want a desktop icon so that we can easily find it. Now when you get to this screen, install additional software. We want to decline that. That is extra crap that we simply do not want, and especially when they're offering us 2 separate antivirus programs. Always be careful when you're installing software off the internet, especially for the free ones. Sometimes they have that crap. It's basically ads built into the installer so that they can make money off those ads, and that's how they support their free software. Start FileZilla now. I got the little welcome box, and this is FileZilla. Okay, so in here you can see my computer and all of the contents of it, yay me. And on this side, so this left side is your local computer, and this side is the remote computer you're connecting to. So in the host, we're going to type in our website, highway45.ca. The username is the username we just created, highway45admin. And the password. Now the port will be 21. And just hit the quick connect button. Save passwords. Sure. The server's certificate is unknown. Please carefully examine the certificate to make sure that the server can be trusted. Shall we trust it? Always trust the certificate. Now it's going to verify the certificate, create the connection. Okay, now you'll see that it checked for a password and it said login authentication failed. Critical error, could not connect to server. And the reason why is because right here, this line, authentication failed. So that means either the username or password were incorrect. In this case, it's our username. So at the end of the username, put the @ symbol, and we're going to type the name of our website, highway45.ca. Make sure that's still port 21. If you leave it blank, I think it does 21 by default because that is the default port for FTP. FTP standing for File Transfer Protocol. Hit quick connect again, and boom, we are connected. Okay, so now you see that it has the folders that we have. It has this extra file which says FTP quota. When we created the FTP account for our site, it created this file. Now, as you note, it does start with that dot. Now, I want to talk a little bit about these files because we had this folder that did the same thing. Okay, so when you see a file that has a dot to start, that is a Linux file that is hidden. Okay, it's a hidden system file for Linux because our server uses Linux as its operating system. Now, with Windows, there's always 2 parts to any file. There is the file name and the file extension, and they are separated by that dot. So left side is the file name, right side is the extension. Linux doesn't require a file name, so you can just have dot and then a name. With Windows, it has to have both of those parts. So if you tried to create this file in Windows, you would get an error because there's no file name. These files can only be created in Linux, and that will come into effect later when we talk about htaccess files. So just keep that in mind. You can't create that in Windows. You can open it and edit it and save it, but you can't create it without doing some workarounds. But note that that's what that is. It's basically just a file that's hidden. Okay? So we don't have to worry about it. And we have our two main files here that we had created, the index and the test. Okay. So now we can actually copy this by dragging and dropping. So you can drag it and drop it into any folder you want. So if I wanted to go to my desktop, I can copy this file directly to my desktop. And now I'm going to hit Winky M, which is minimize all. And there is my index file. Okay. Now you can right click that and hit open. Depending on the software you have installed, it will open it with different programs. I am going to just cheat a little bit. And I'm going to open Notepad. Notepad you can get to by hitting the Winky R. When I say Winky, it's the Windows key, often known as the Win key, or if you say it fast, Winky. That key holding it down and hitting R is run. If you hold down the Winky and hit M, it's minimize. Anyways, Winky R and type in Notepad and hit enter, and it will open your Notepad for you. Then you can click on your index file and drag it into the Notepad, and it will just open it for you. And you see that it is the exact same, right? That is everything that we had created. Now, if you notice, we had done it with tabs, but these are clearly a bunch of spaces. If I select them all and hit tab, it will actually create a tab. And that's because some programs will actually generate tabs by using a series of spaces instead of actually generating a tab. That can be okay, that can be annoying, depending on how you want to look at it. These tabs specifically are actually very, very big, and that looks really awkward. You can either save that or just close it. It doesn't matter. Don't save. We will not be using Notepad. You can actually use Notepad to create all of your HTML files. I wouldn't recommend it because it's very basic and doesn't give us a lot. It's actually probably more useful just to stick with the built-in editor in Control Panel, but we're not going to use either of those. Instead, we're going to go back to our Internet Explorer, and this time we're going to look for another file. We can close that one, and this time we're going to look for something called Notepad++. Now you notice I typed that into the URL. You can also type it into actual Google and it will look for it there too. Okay, so Notepad++, downloads, and you'll see it has various releases. We're just going to take the newest one, and you'll see it has a bunch of these different things. Okay, 32-bit, 64-bit. The default one is that 32-bit. We are actually just going to download the 64-bit installer. What do we want to do with it? We want to keep it. Open that up. And if you see me dragging things across, it's because, as I mentioned before, I use two monitors. Especially for creating videos, it's really helpful because I have my video creation software on the other monitor, but by default it opens a lot of these windows on the other one, so I just drag it over so you can see it. Okay, with this one, the localization is languages. By default, it will just give you English. If you want more, then you can check whichever language you prefer to work in. because apparently Irish and Pig Latin are very, very useful languages to know. All right. So just leave that unchecked unless there's something specific you need. And again, you can create a desktop shortcut. But I won't do that this time. And we want to run it. Okay, so now you notice that I already have a bunch of tabs open. And it created a new file called changelog and basically just tells you the new things that came with this version of Notepad. Otherwise, it has a bunch of extra files that I got in there. But you notice that this has multiple numbers, or multiple line numbers. So it is like our other editor where it numbers the lines. And it also has a bunch of different things up at the top here. So the first thing, we can go to encoding. That should be UTF-8. Language. And you notice that it has a bunch of letters and then some weird things. That's because if it shows a weird word, it's because that is the only language that starts with that letter, right? If we go under P, you can see that there is PHP right there, and we can select that. And what that does is that does our code highlighting. Okay, there are plugins that you can get for this, including spell checks, different programs. It is quite an advanced tool, but for the most part, it is just kind of a basic text editor that just gives us a few extra features. So we're going to minimize our browser there, find our little index file, and bring it into there as well. And now you notice that it has the code highlighting, right? It also has these little boxes on the side here, and those just minimize each level within the hierarchy. Okay? So it works pretty much the exact same as that editor that we were using directly through cPanel, except now this is on our computer. So we can work on our computer and then upload the files when we're done through FileZilla. And that is one way that you can work. The nice thing about this is that you can do the tabs, and this one will actually have little lines here, if you noticed, that will show the difference between a single tab and multiple tabs. Right. So instead of spaces, we can create tabs. But yeah, there we go. It's a lot more, it's better organized, really, is what it is. But it still has the code highlighting and everything that we need. We can minimize things, so if I don't need to look at my header all the time, I can minimize that and save space. Okay. It also has a larger box that we can drag out. The search algorithms, you can do find, so Control F. You can find any single line that you need. If you do Control H, you can do a replace, so you can find and replace. There's lots of different little tricks and tips within it. You can turn on and off word wrap, so if you want it to wrap around and it'll create that extra space without actually having a new line number, or you can have it just go off into infinity in the direction, in which case you'll get a horizontal scroll bar like that, where you can just go across. Otherwise, if you put on the word wrap, you see it creates that extra line without having a line number, so that we know that is all part of the same line. All right, so that is Notepad++. Now, I highly recommend having Notepad++ on your computer, even if you're not going to be using it for this. The other thing I want you to notice is how these are blue, this one is red. The main thing that I like about Notepad++ is it saves everything as temporary files. So because I haven't saved the changes, this shows up as red. If I close this, so I'm actually just going to do a little test. I'm going to write test at the very bottom. I mean, you should never do this, but I'm putting that there just to show you for the example. Now I'm going to close this program right out. I'm going to bring it back, hitting Win key and R, and typing in Notepad++ into the run box, and that will open this back up. And you notice all my tabs are still there. The newest one, that index.php, which is still red, is still there, and it has my change. Now if I close that, do I want to save the changes? No, I won't save the changes. And I'm going to open this. Now, if you right click and go edit with Notepad++, that will also do the same. And you notice I don't have that test there anymore because it never saved that, but it did save it within the page. So if I make any changes, that's red again, notice, basically indicating that there are unsaved changes. If I go save and I close it again, close that, edit with Notepad, it is now there still. Delete that, this is red. We can hit the save button up here, or Control S is save, and close that. Now if I go back into this, there, and you notice that when I close it and I went edit with Notepad, sorry, when I say Notepad, I do mean Notepad++ from here on out. I just don't want to have to say ++ every time. But it didn't create another index.php because it knew that we already had it open, so it's going to keep it open in that same tab. It just puts that tab to the forefront if I had a different tab open the last time I was using it. Okay. So that is one HTML editor that you can use, and one that I recommend highly using. Okay, now with FileZilla, if you want to use this constantly, you can actually go through the site manager and you can create a new site and store all of that information so that you don't have to type it in every time. But we're not actually going to use either of these programs. I just wanted to show you that's one way, and those are the two components that we're looking for. However, what we want is one program that uses both of those components. So we want something where we can edit it, but also allows us to upload the files directly to the server. This type of program is called an IDE. Integrated Development Environment. Okay, it's basically a fancy way of saying that it is a program that does multiple things. And the IDE that we're going to be using, that I'm going to show you and walk you through, and what we'll be using to create our site, is called NetBeans. NetBeans. Now, I'm going to show you there's two different things here. There's NetBeans IDE 8.2, and then there's the main NetBeans. Okay, and if you look here, the stable release is 11.2 as of December 3rd, 2019, and this one is 8.2. This one here is actually the one that I currently use, but we will be downloading the newest one. The difference is the people who were developing NetBeans stopped after 8.2, and this was the latest release that they had created before it was sold off entirely to Apache and became Apache NetBeans. Now the reason for this is because Apache develops Java, and this is based on Java. So you needed to install Java and install NetBeans in order to get it to run together. And they had at some point an integrated install where you could download and it would install both software for you. But this one just kind of rolls everything into one. So it's easier to set up and use. The interface, I checked it out because when it first came out I was a little leery because, you know, don't fix what isn't broken. This one worked perfectly for me, so I had no reason to update it. But this is the newest one, and it does integrate both, and from what I've seen, it looks and acts the exact same. So we're just going to do that because it's going to be easier for us to use. Less work. So basically, you go to the netbeans.org site or click on the link, and there's download right there for us. And which release do we want? There is feature update. Download. And again, you'll find a bunch of different things. We are looking for Windows x64.exe. So this one under the installers. Now, if you're wondering what binaries and source are, that's how you would install it through Linux. So if you had a Linux operating system, you would be installing it on that, because this is actually designed to work on multiple platforms. So again, something that can work on any operating system. So as you can see, there's a Mac OS file, a Linux file, a Windows file, and those are for different versions of Linux. But for now, just the Windows x64. The x64 meaning it's 64-bit Windows, which you should have. If you don't have it, you have a very, very old computer. And you should be actually using a 64-bit operating system. I'm not going to go over why, it's just infinitely better. And this is basically just a bunch of different mirror hosts. So when a company provides free software, a lot of the times they'll have their software loaded onto a bunch of different websites so that you can download it from different websites in case one isn't working or one is too slow. So they give you a bunch of options. Basically just pick the first one. If it doesn't work for whatever reason, or it seems like it's going incredibly slow, try the next one and keep going down the list until you find one that works and is relatively quick. But it shouldn't take too long. Okay, and we're just installing that now. Welcome to the Apache NetBeans IDE 11.3 installer. Okay, so you can customize, so if you want it stored on a different location, you can. And it'll ask you what components you want to install, and I recommend just keeping them all checked. Hitting next. Although if you don't want the 2 Java ones, you can probably get rid of those. If you're a stickler for space or you have very limited space, but if that's the case, I highly recommend you just update your hard drive and get a larger one. Okay, so this shows you the 2 different components. So the NetBeans and the JDK is Java Development Kit. So like I said, with the previous version, you had to install Java and NetBeans separately, and this one just kind of gives you both together. Check for updates automatically, and install. Now, when I talk about how this runs off Java, and you've already heard me use the term JavaScript before, those two, while sounding like they're very much related, are actually not related whatsoever. The fact that this is also called NetBeans should give you some idea that people who do a lot of programming think about coffee a lot. And a lot of the names of things that we use are based off of that. I'm actually done with the Apache website, so I can just close that in the background while we're waiting for this to install. Now, while this is installing, I guess it's a good time to go over a couple things. If you don't want to keep the programs that we had installed previously, in other words, the FileZilla and Notepad++, you can uninstall them because we are going to be just using this one primarily. I do recommend you keep Notepad++ because it is a very handy tool for opening a lot of different text document files. However, you don't necessarily need it. FileZilla, especially if you're not going to be using FTP for anything, there's no reason to keep that on your computer. This program will do everything that we need for our web work. Okay, now once that finished installing, you should have a NetBeans icon on your desktop. And if you click on that and open it, mine is opening. You just can't see it because it's on screen. Little dialog box there. I click to agree, and then you should have this window. Okay, so no project open and a blank screen there with some things up top. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a new project. So go up to File and New Project. And what type of project do we want to create? We want to create a PHP project and PHP application from remote server. Okay, now it will ask you a few things. The project name, we're going to go with Highway 45. You can name it the name of your company or the name of your website. It can really be anything. It doesn't have to be something specific. Basically, what this will affect is the folder that it is stored in on your desktop or on your computer. Now, if you don't want it in the default folder, you can change that right here to wherever you want to store this. Myself specifically, I'm going to be storing it elsewhere on my computer because I don't want it on that drive. I will be using a different drive. Okay, I figured out where I want to store mine. Okay, now the PHP version should reflect the version that you're using on your web server. Default encoding should be UTF-8. Put NetBeans metadata into a separate directory that you can keep or change. I'm just going to leave that off. Hit next. Project URL. So what is the website of our, what is the domain name of our website? So HTTP, you can actually put an S in there if you like, highway45.ca. Now remote connection and the upload directory that we want, you see it automatically put in a /highway45. I'm just going to keep it there. So it should just be a / because we want to use the base directory. Remote connection, manage, create or connection name. This will be Highway 45, and you can name it accordingly, just the short version of whatever you use basically for the name of the project would work here. Doesn't have to be anything specific. The host name should be our domain name, highway45.ca. Port is 21. Encryption, you see there's a few different ones. We're just going to use pure FTP. The username is going to be our username again. And just like with the last program, we're going to add in the @ and the domain name again. Now, if it doesn't work with the domain name, remove that and just use this. It will depend on how your web host has it set up, if it's just the username or if it's the username @ the domain name. Okay, but if you're using the same one that I'm using, then that's how they need it done. So try both, see which one works. One will give you an authentication error, one will not. And the password, initial directory, again, that should just be a / timeout at 30 and keep a live interval at 30 is perfectly fine. Passive mode is fine. Ignore disconnect errors is fine. Now, if you want, you can hit the test connection. That button will just basically attempt to connect using this and give us a failure if it doesn't work. Okay, that's because if you look up here, I put highway instead of Highway 45. So I misspelled the name of the domain. Connection succeeded. That is what we wanted here, so now we can hit OK. And hit next. There we go. Now confirmation, and it will check. And it says, look at all these files that we found. Do we want to download them all? And check all and finish. And now it will give us this. So basically each website that you have or create, you can store as a project, and it will pop up here. So the PHP is the type, the name that we gave the project, and then it'll create a source files folder, and within that it will give us all of the files that are used. Now if you see it's got a navigator here, we're actually just going to close that because we don't need that. It's interesting. I don't think this is actually in my previous version, but I don't use that anyway. This output, I'm going to move. If you notice, it has the orange box. It tells me where it's going to put it. I want to make it so that it puts it at the bottom here, so that the orange box is in the bottom left, and when I release, it should put it where that other folder was. Now I'm going to move this and slide it down to the bottom, because this basically just shows you the actual FTP commands that it's sending back and forth. We don't need to really pay much attention to this, other than to look for bright green or bright red. Bright green meaning success. In other words, it successfully downloaded all these files for us. If it gives us something red, it means there was an error, and we need to keep an eye out for that when we're saving and creating. I honestly have no idea what that is, because that is new. Like I said, this isn't the version I'm used to, but it is pretty much the same. Okay, now the other thing that you're going to notice is this is a whole lot of white, and like I said before, I don't like working with things that are white. So one of the things we can do is go down to Tools and Templates. Is it in Templates? No, it is not Templates. They do not call it that. Options. So in Options, you go to Fonts and Colors and Profile. And I'm going to notice that there are a bunch of different ones. You can also download different ones, but I think I'm going to go with this Flat Laugh Dark. Yeah, I'm going to go with Flat Laugh Dark. And then the only difference is this background now. I am going to change that to just black. Okay, I'm going to apply that and hit OK. Now you see that in my main window it has a black background. I'm going to move this over so that it is kind of minimized and that the bulk of my window is now my programming window. And this is what I'm going to use. So I'm going to exit out of the program and I'm going to open it back up. The reason why I did that is because if there are any errors and your computer crashes, when it comes back up, it will probably go back to all the default settings because it didn't close properly. By exiting, you kind of save all the changes that you made. So now every time I open it, it will look like this. You notice that when I opened it, it automatically kept my project open with all the things in it. So now I have instant access to all of my files. Project properties is what I'm looking for. Okay, so the main thing is under Run Configuration, you want to make sure that the Upload Files on Save is selected. And that's really the only thing that you need to keep in mind. And that should be what is selected by default. If not, just make sure that that is set. What that means is whenever we hit save, so if I change this, so for example, under here, I'm going to create a new paragraph, and I'm going to just hit test. Now you notice that stuff pops up as I'm typing. If you don't want this stuff to pop up, which I don't because that is super annoying, go into our tools and options again, and under under editor and general, we want to uncheck show tooltips, go to code completion, and uncheck auto pop-up completion window and auto pop-up documentation window. Hit apply and OK, and now all of those pop-ups should be gone. I can do whatever I want. Create anchor tag, and it won't bug me anymore. Okay, cool. So test, and we're going to save. Now you can either save by going up to the save button. There's a save and save all. The save all will save all of the tabs that you have open. So for example, we have the index page, but we also have the test page. So if we open up the test page, you notice that both of these files are now open in different tabs, and we can edit them together. You notice how the test shows up as regular, whereas the index shows up as bolded. That bold means that we've made changes that are unsaved. So if we save that, you can either save all, which will save all the tabs that you have open, or just save will save the individual one. I'm just going to hit save, but I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control S. So as soon as I hit Control S, you see our output is now going crazy, and at the end it says file successful. Successfully renamed or moved, which means that we moved this file, the index.php, from our being locally stored on our computer to our server. And now if we go back to our website here and we reload this, you'll notice it made that change. If we go back and we delete this line altogether, and we hit Control S again to save, it did its work there, and we reload this and it's gone. So now we don't have to go into our control panel at all anymore. We can just work straight off using that browser and this. So if you have a couple monitors set up for your computer, and that's basically what I do. I keep this program, NetBeans, open in one window, and in the other window I would keep my website with the I keep Google Chrome with my website open, and I use those simultaneously, so that way I can just go back and forth between the two screens to check all the changes as I make them. Alright, so that basically concludes this part of the tutorial. We now have a program which is referred to as an IDE, or Integrated Development Environment, in which we can use to create our website and upload it to the server all in one program and make our lives run a lot smoother. But before we go, we're going to go one step further and start in on the next video, which will get into graphics. So for that, we're going to need to download another program. So before we do that, I am going to go to GIMP. GIMP, GNU Image Manipulation Program. If you have not heard of GIMP, GIMP is a free image editing software program. It is by far the most advanced free image editor you can get. The most common image editor in existence is undoubtedly Adobe Photoshop, and many people will likely have heard of Photoshop. The problem with Photoshop is, to get it legitimately, it is extremely expensive. GIMP does almost everything that Photoshop can do, and it's completely free. So we are going to use GIMP. In fact, as far as I know, there's actually one advantage that GIMP has that Adobe Photoshop doesn't, and that's the ability to actually create icons. Because Adobe Photoshop does not actually allow you to save as an icon file. That said, icons are pretty much deprecated, and most of the time you can get away with just using a PNG file, which we'll talk about in the next video. But for this, we're downloading and installing programs. So while we're doing that, we're doing this. Install for all users again. Select language English. And let's just see what's in the customize here. We can change where it's installed, but we're going to keep that default. And yes, we want to install all those components. We can create a desktop icon for it, sure, and install. I always like to go into that customize because typically there's different things, like if you don't want your programs installed on the same directory as Windows, sometimes, especially nowadays, that more and more people are switching to solid state drives, but the drives are actually smaller in size. You might want Windows on one hard drive and all of your installed programs on another one, just so that you don't have one hard drive that's literally packed tight. Because if you use a lot of programs, they can take up a lot of space. But for the most part, some of these smaller programs really don't make that much of a difference. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I typically do use Photoshop for work that I do, but I also use GIMP a lot of the time. So, while I do prefer Photoshop because I've been using Photoshop since it was first created, I'm very comfortable with it. However, there is a lot you can do like in Photoshop, but with GIMP, and GIMP is free. So I highly recommend you get it and use it and get comfortable using it to create the images that we're going to need for the website. That window now and open up GIMP. I haven't actually used it in a while. It looks a lot prettier than it normally did, that I'm used to it. Because I don't think I've used GIMP 2. I think I've only been using GIMP 1, which was very much bare bones as far as its physical appearance as a program. One of the other nice things about GIMP is that it, like all the other programs we're using, works on multiple operating systems. Okay, so File, New, you can choose the size, but we'll get more into this in the next video. For now, we have it, so we can use it. This is where I'm going to leave you, and in our next tutorial, we will be going over how to create images using GIMP and how to work with colors and themes within our website. Okay, for now, I will leave you, and I'll see you in the next video.